Moscow, August 12, 1570. The Kremlin's Great Hall. A Russian prince stands before Tsar Ivan IV, accused of conspiracy. The assembled court, boyars in fur-trimmed robes, foreign ambassadors, noblewomen in elaborate headdresses, expects a swift execution. A beheading, perhaps. Exile at worst. What happens instead will be discussed in horrified whispers across Europe for decades. The prince is stripped naked before the entire court. Ivan watches, commenting sarcastically, as executioners perform castration while the victim screams. Then comes the final humiliation. The nobleman is forced to parade through Moscow streets, bleeding and naked, before his execution. This was not random cruelty. This was calculated terror, a message written in blood and shame. Throughout history, certain monarchs discovered something darker than execution. They learned that destroying a person's dignity, violating their most intimate self, created a fear that mere death could never achieve. These rulers didn't just kill their enemies, they annihilated them, body, honor, family legacy, in ways designed to haunt witnesses for generations. This is the story of 10 kings who weaponized shame, who turned the human body into a battlefield of humiliation, who understood that the cruelest punishments attack not flesh, but the soul. Ivan IV ruled Russia from 1547 until his death in 1584. History remembers him as the Terrible, a translation that fails to capture the Russian Grozny, which means both terrible and awe-inspiring. After his beloved first wife Anastasia died in 1560, possibly poisoned, Ivan's paranoia transformed into systematic brutality. He created the oprichnina, a state within a state. His oprichniki, dressed entirely in black, rode black horses and carried symbols of a broom and dog's head, representing their mission to sweep away treason and bite the Tsar's enemies. These men possessed absolute authority. They were above all law. Heinrich von Staden, a German mercenary who served as an oprichnik, kept detailed journals. His accounts describe Ivan's personal participation in torture. The Tsar didn't merely order punishments. He attended them, contributed ideas, mocked victims during their suffering. For nobles suspected of disloyalty, Ivan favored public castration. The victim would be bound in Red Square or within the Kremlin itself. Court members were required to attend. Ivan would sometimes interrupt the procedure to ask the victim questions. "Are you loyal now? Do you still plot against your Tsar?" The cruelty had layers, physical agony combined with forced participation in one's own humiliation. But the wives suffered worse. When Ivan executed a nobleman for treason, the widow and daughters were brought to court. Russian chroniclers describe these women being publicly stripped before being distributed among the oprichniki or sent to remote convents. The message was clear. Defying Ivan didn't just cost your life, it destroyed your entire family's honor across generations. The sacking of Novgorod in January 1570 represents Ivan's terror at its zenith. The city had allegedly supported Ivan's enemies. His response was systematic horror. Chronicles record that Ivan ordered the city's women violated publicly as collective punishment, while he watched from an elevated platform, eating, drinking, as if attending entertainment. 5 weeks, 60,000 dead. The Volkhov River choked with corpses. Ivan's logic was strategic. Death ends suffering quickly. But shame, intimate, public, irreversible shame, creates a wound that never heals. Victims' families carry the stain forever. Witnesses remember. Fear spreads like disease. But Ivan wasn't history's first monarch to discover that humiliation could be more effective than execution. Centuries earlier, in the markets of Cairo, another ruler was perfecting his own architecture of shame. Al-Hakim, bi-amr Allah, Al-Hakim by God's command, ruled Egypt as the sixth Fatimid Caliph from 996 to 1021 CE. Even by medieval standards, he was considered insane. He issued decrees that defied logic. Dogs were banned from Cairo because their barking annoyed him. Soldiers killed every dog in the city. Grapes were forbidden. Watercress was illegal. He prohibited chess. He outlawed women's shoes. That last decree reveals Al-Hakim's particular obsession. He believed women should never leave their homes. Ever. By banning the manufacture of shoes for women, he removed their ability to walk outside. Women caught in Cairo's streets were publicly stripped and whipped as warning to others. The contemporary chronicler Al-Makrizi documented Al-Hakim's fixation on controlling subjects' intimate behavior. He banned certain foods he considered aphrodisiacs. Merchants caught selling them were castrated in the marketplace. Al-Hakim apparently believed that removing reproductive capacity purified society. One case stands out in the chronicles. A man was accused of looking at a woman inappropriately, not touching, not speaking, merely looking. Al-Hakim ordered him castrated, then forced to wear women's clothing and work in the market as a woman for the remainder of his life. The punishment combined mutilation with gender humiliation, creating a living example of the caliph's power to reshape reality itself. When Al-Hakim discovered a conspiracy among his viziers, he created an elaborate punishment sequence. First, public stripping. Then, parading through Cairo mounted backward on donkeys, a position of maximum humiliation in Islamic culture. Then castration. Only then, finally, execution. The order mattered. Each stage had purpose. The humiliation made death almost a mercy. In 1021, Al-Hakim disappeared during one of his nocturnal walks through Cairo. He was likely assassinated, possibly by his own sister, who had grown weary of his tyranny and feared she would be his next victim. Al-Hakim's punishments were rooted in religious obsession. But in 15th century, France, a very different kind of ruler, was discovering that humiliation could serve cold political calculation. Louis XVIII ruled France from 1461 to 1483. They called him the universal spider for his intricate political webs. He was brilliant, consolidating royal power, outmaneuvering nobles, expanding French territory through diplomacy rather than war. He was also cruel in ways that served precise purposes. Philippe de Comines, who served Louis for years, documented his methods. Louis had iron cages constructed, too small to stand in, too short to lie down in comfortably. Traitors were confined in these cages for months, years. But Louis added a twist. The cages were placed in public squares, where citizens could see and mock the prisoners. Some prisoners were kept in only undergarments, others completely naked. The exposure was part of the punishment, not just confinement, but constant shame. Cardinal Jean Balue conspired against Louis in 1469. He was placed in an iron cage for 11 years. Chronicles mention that Balue was periodically stripped and exhibited as part of his sentence. 11 years of claustrophobic confinement and humiliation for a man who once wielded ecclesiastical power. But Louis's cruelest innovation involved forced marriages. When he captured enemy nobles, he sometimes forced their daughters or widows to marry men of deliberately low status, peasants, merchants, even executioners. The profession of executioner was considered so degrading that executioners couldn't touch anyone without causing contamination. Their children couldn't marry into respectable families. One case particularly reveals Louis's calculated malice. He forced the daughter of a rebel duke to marry the royal executioner. The young noblewoman, who had expected to marry a prince or at least a count, was instead wed to the man who killed criminals for a living. Louis didn't stop there. The marriage was consummated under supervision to ensure the union was legally valid. Witnesses verified the act. The humiliation was absolute. Forced intimacy with a man whose profession made him untouchable, with others watching to confirm her degradation. The practice served dual purposes. It punished enemy families through irreversible dishonor, and it bought loyalty from the low-status husband who received an unexpected social elevation and wealth, making him forever grateful to the king who gave him a noble wife. Louis's punishments were surgical, precise applications of shame to achieve political goals. But some rulers used intimate humiliation more broadly, as entertainment and spectacle. Herod ruled Judea as Rome's client king from 37 to 4 BCE. He built magnificently, expanding the Second Temple in Jerusalem, constructing fortresses, creating harbors. He was also consumed by paranoia. Flavius Josephus, the Jewish Roman historian, extensively documented Herod's cruelties. The most infamous involves his wife Mariamne, a Hasmonean princess Herod loved, obsessively. When Herod suspected Mariamne of infidelity, probably falsely, he ordered an investigation. Her servants were tortured. According to Josephus, the interrogation included intimate humiliations to extract confessions. When servants testified against her under torture, Mariamne was declared guilty. Before her execution in 29 BCE, Herod forced a public trial. Explicit accusations about her alleged intimate conduct were read with degrading details before the entire court. Mariamne, a princess of the Hasmonean dynasty, was forced to hear herself described in the crudest terms. She maintained dignity until the end. Josephus writes that she walked to her execution without tears, without pleading. Her silence was its own accusation of Herod. He mourned her afterward with the same obsessive intensity he had suspected her. He called her name. He ordered servants to bring her as if she still lived. His grief was as excessive as his cruelty. But for political enemies, Herod showed no such remorse. When he executed nobles for treason, he routinely ordered that wives and daughters be handed over to soldiers before being killed. This wasn't random violence. It was calculated to destroy family honor completely. Josephus mentions a case where Herod ordered a conspirator's entire family violated publicly in Jerusalem's theater before executions. The theater setting is significant. This wasn't hidden brutality, but a performed spectacle. Citizens were summoned to watch. The message was clear. Defying Herod resulted in total annihilation, not just of life, but of dignity, lineage, honor. Herod used humiliation to terrorize a subject population, but perhaps history's most famous practitioner of intimate terror used it for psychological satisfaction. Vlad III ruled Wallachia in 3 periods during the 15th century, most famously from 1456 to 1462. History remembers him primarily for impalement, a punishment where victims were pierced with wooden stakes that passed through the body, designed to kill slowly over hours or days. But Vlad's use of impalement had variations that revealed darker purposes. Saxon chronicles from Transylvania and German pamphlets printed shortly after Vlad's death describe that he frequently ordered women accused of intimate crimes, adultery, prostitution, to be impaled specifically through their intimate areas. The stake was inserted in a particular way to maximize humiliation beyond pain. A German manuscript from 1488 describes Vlad ordering a rival nobleman's mistress impaled and displayed naked at his castle entrance. The combination of forced nudity, violation by stake, and public exhibition created spectacle beyond execution. Vlad didn't just kill, he staged tableaus of horror. When Ottoman ambassadors refused to remove their turbans in his presence, citing religious custom, Vlad had the turbans nailed to their heads with iron nails. They died slowly from the wounds, unable to remove the turbans that killed them. For traitors from his own court, punishments were more elaborate. A boyar accused of adultery with another nobleman's wife was castrated. His own organs were forced into his mouth. Then he was impaled. The chronicles mention that Vlad supervised punishments personally. He ate meals while executions occurred before him. Once, when a courtier complained about the smell of decomposing bodies, Vlad had him impaled on a higher stake, so he would be above the smell. The cruelty had layers, physical, psychological, even darkly humorous. Vlad created an environment of constant terror, where any interaction with him might result in inventive death. Vlad's cruelty was personal, almost artistic. But in the Delhi Sultanate, another ruler was using intimate humiliation as state policy. Muhammad bin Tughlaq ruled the Delhi Sultanate from 1325 to 1351. Historians describe him as brilliant but erratic, a ruler whose reforms were often visionary, but whose implementation was catastrophic. Ibn Battuta, the Moroccan traveler who served at Tughlaq's court for years, documented the Sultan's contradictions. Tughlaq was learned, speaking multiple languages, discussing philosophy. He was also paranoid and cruel. One favorite punishment involved forcing condemned prisoners to wear donkey skins, then parading them through Delhi, while crowds were encouraged to mock and spit. For more serious crimes, Tughlaq added intimate elements. Ibn Battuta reported a case of a provincial governor who rebelled. When captured and brought to Delhi, Tughlaq ordered him publicly stripped, his clothes burned, then mounted backward on a donkey and paraded through the city. After this humiliation, the governor was publicly castrated before final execution. Ibn Battuta personally witnessed another case. Tughlaq suspected a courtier of having an affair with a woman from the royal harem. The courtier was forced to undress and was publicly whipped on his intimate parts before execution. The woman was stoned to death, but first was forced to watch her lover's suffering. Tughlaq justified these punishments as necessary for order and morality. But Ibn Battuta, who initially admired the Sultan, gradually came to see him as dangerously unstable. The traveler eventually fled Delhi, fearing he would be the next victim of Tughlaq's unpredictable rage. In Delhi, intimate punishment served a paranoid ruler's need for control. But in Tudor England, a king was using marriage itself as a weapon. Henry VIII ruled England from 1509 to 1547. His 6 marriages are famous. Less discussed is how Henry weaponized marriage, sexuality, and accusations of intimate misconduct. Anne Boleyn, his second wife, was executed in May 1536 on fabricated charges of adultery, with 5 men, including her own brother. But before execution came the trial. The charges read in open court were explicitly detailed. Anne was forced to sit and listen, as accusations described alleged intimate acts in degrading specificity. This was deliberate humiliation, forcing the Queen of England to hear herself described as a whore before nobles, clergy, foreign ambassadors. The charges were almost certainly false. Henry wanted to remarry. Anne had failed to provide a male heir. The accusations of sexual misconduct were the tool to destroy her legally while demolishing her reputation completely. Catherine Howard, Henry's 5th wife, suffered similarly in 1542. Her trial included detailed testimonies about her intimate behavior before and during marriage. Chroniclers noted that the explicit nature of the accusations was unusual, designed for maximum humiliation. Both women went to their executions with shredded reputations. Death was almost secondary to the destruction of their honor. Henry also controlled marriages of his subjects. Daughters of nobles who displeased him were sometimes forced into marriages with men. Henry specifically chose to humiliate the family, men who were old, poor, or of questionable reputation. The forced marriages destroyed family honor, while demonstrating Henry's absolute control over his subjects' most intimate decisions. Henry's cruelty served personal desires disguised as political necessity. But in medieval Baghdad, a caliph was using religious law as cover for spectacles of terror. Al-Mustansir Billah ruled as Abbasid caliph from 1226 to 1242 CE. Though real power was held by Seljuk sultans, Al-Mustansir maintained religious and judicial authority in Baghdad. He applied Islamic law with particular severity for intimate crimes. Adultery was punishable by stoning according to Sharia, but Al-Mustansir added layers of humiliation. The condemned were first forced to confess publicly in the main mosque, describing their acts explicitly. Then they were stripped and paraded through Baghdad streets to the execution site. The parade could last hours. Ibn al-Athir, a contemporary historian, mentioned that Al-Mustansir ordered a man accused of sodomy not only executed, but first publicly castrated, then burned alive. The execution was conducted in the central square, with the entire population summoned to watch. Al-Mustansir framed these elaborate public punishments as demonstrations of religious authority and deterrence to sin. But the effect was to terrorize through spectacles that attacked bodies and dignity. Peter ruled Castile from 1350 to 1369. His enemies called him the Cruel. His supporters called him the Dispenser of Justice. The truth probably contains both. When his half-brother Fadrique, master of Santiago, was accused of conspiracy, Peter ordered his execution in 1358. But first, according to chronicler Pero López de Ayala, Peter had Fadrique paraded chained and partially stripped through Seville streets. Peter routinely punished the women of political enemies. When he captured rebels' castles, he forced wives and daughters to become servants at his court, or distributed them to his followers as forced wives. In one documented case, Peter forced the widow of an executed nobleman to marry the executioner who had killed her husband, a punishment combining grief with humiliation. The woman was forced to comply under threat of her children's deaths. Justinian ruled the Byzantine Empire from 527 to 565 CE, often assisted by his wife, Theodora. While remembered for legal codification and military reconquests, the historian Procopius wrote a secret history claiming to describe their dark side. According to Procopius, Theodora maintained a private prison where women accused of moral crimes were held and tortured. Modern historians debate Procopius's reliability. He was a political enemy, writing after Justinian's death. However, official records confirm that Justinian enacted laws in 533 prescribing castration as punishment for sodomy. This law was publicly applied in Constantinople, with executions being public spectacles. These 10 rulers span different cultures, religions, and historical periods, yet share disturbing patterns. All used intimate humiliation as deliberate tools of political control. These punishments weren't random cruelty. They were calculated policies intended to terrorize through attacks, not just on bodies, but on dignity and honor. Public humiliation, particularly of an intimate nature, was seen as more effective than swift execution because it completely destroyed victims socially and psychologically before physical death. The use of forced nudity, public castration, degrading marriages, and intimate violation demonstrated that rulers had absolute power over subjects' bodies and lives. It showed that no aspect of human existence, not even the most private, was beyond royal reach. It's important to contextualize these practices within their eras. In many pre-modern societies, public corporal punishment was the norm. Modern concepts of privacy and human dignity didn't exist the same way. Nevertheless, even by their own time's standards, these rulers were considered exceptionally cruel. Contemporary chroniclers frequently recorded shock and horror. Ibn Battuta fled Delhi. German pamphleteers portrayed Vlad as monstrous. Russian sources described Ivan with dread. The fact that multiple civilizations independently developed similar intimate punishments suggests something troubling about human nature and power. When individuals gain absolute authority without accountability, there's a tendency to exploit victims' deepest vulnerabilities. The human body becomes a battlefield where domination is demonstrated most viscerally. The victims were real people whose suffering was immense. Thousands mutilated, humiliated, killed in ways that attacked their fundamental humanity. Their stories deserve remembering, not for sensationalism, but as warning about unlimited power's dangers. Modern society's development of rule of law, separation of powers, and human rights protections came partly in response to centuries of such abuses. The study of extreme tyranny reminds us why limitations on power and protection of human dignity are essential. No individual should have authority to inflict such suffering. The transition from societies where kings could order castration and public humiliation to modern democracies with civil rights was long, difficult, built on countless lives destroyed by tyrants throughout history. The question that haunts these stories: if power corrupts absolutely, how do we ensure that no ruler, no government, no institution ever again possesses the kind of unchecked authority these 10 kings wielded? The answer lies in memory, in refusing to forget, in building systems that distribute power and protect the vulnerable, in recognizing that the capacity for such cruelty exists in human nature and constructing safeguards against it. These kings are dead, their victims are dust, but the lessons remain, carved in the darkest chapters of human history.